Case file number 22. The demons you saw in Devil May Cry, the ones you thought were just video game monsters, they're not made up. They're stolen from real history, from grimoires that existed, from legends people genuinely feared. You've seen the games, you've fought the bosses, but you never asked where they came from. 9 creatures, 9 real sources. One of them isn't just mythology. One of them was summoned, on purpose, by a man who believed he was serving God. That's the one we're saving for last. 9 cases. The real demons behind Devil May Cry. Let's open the file. Here's what you need to understand. Every demon in Devil May Cry isn't random. The developers didn't invent these things from nothing. They pulled from centuries of European demonology, occult texts, and folk nightmares. The patterns are specific. A bird demon, a fire demon, a demon that's literally a living weapon. These aren't just cool designs. They're records, case files from people who claimed they saw these things, people who wrote entire books about them. And the strangest part, the ones that show up most often in the games, the ones you remember most, are the ones with the most detailed historical documentation. 9 field reports, 9 sources. Let's start. Case 9 Griffon, 1493. Nuremberg, Germany. A bird the size of a horse. Eagle's head, lion's body. Wings that could block out the sun. In Devil May Cry, Griffon is a lightning-wielding monster that talks too much. But in the original legend, this creature wasn't a demon. It was something older. The Griffin appears in ancient Persian art. Greek historians wrote about them guarding gold in the mountains. Marco Polo claimed he saw their bones. The medieval bestiary described them as the kings of all beasts, above lions, above eagles. But here's what nobody tells you. The Griffin wasn't just a legend. It was evidence. Medieval scholars used the Griffin to prove that unicorns existed. Their logic? If one mythical creature was real, all of them could be. The Griffin shows up in over 200 illuminated manuscripts from the 12th to 15th centuries. It's carved into cathedral columns. It's on coats of arms. In 1493, the Nuremberg Chronicle, one of the most important printed books of its time, included a full illustration of a griffin alongside real animals. No disclaimer. No, this is a myth. Just a griffin, presented as fact. Paleontologists now have a theory. In 1990, researcher Adrienne Mayer published a study connecting griffin myths to dinosaur fossils. She documented how ancient miners in the Gobi Desert unearthed Protoceratops skeletons, beaked, four-legged, scattered in gold-rich soil. The miners built the myth on the bones. The beak looked like an eagle, the body looked like a lion. The myth wrote itself from the evidence. Mayer's work was published by Princeton University Press. She tracked ancient Greek and Roman writers who described griffins guarding gold. These writers were reporting hearsay from Scythian traders who were describing fossil beds. The griffin wasn't imagined. It was identified, from bones that were very real. That's one bird demon. But Devil May Cry has another creature made of wings and fire, and that one has a much stranger source. Case 8, Argosax, 1620, France. A grimoire called the Key of Solomon. Argosax the Chaos. In Devil May Cry 2, he's a demon king so powerful, he literally becomes the final boss arena. But the name isn't made up. Argosax appears in demonological texts as a prince of hell, a being of pure chaos. In some sources, he's one of the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia, though his exact rank shifts between editions. The legend says Argosax was cast out of heaven before the fall of man. Not for rebellion, for instability. He couldn't hold a form. He couldn't maintain a thought. His very existence was disorder, given flesh. The earliest surviving mention of Argosax is in a manuscript titled Liber Officiorum Spirituum, dated to around 1580. The book lists demonic names and their functions. Argosax is listed as a president, one of the ruling demons. In 1619, a French occultist named Jean du Cange compiled a dictionary of demons. Argosax appears there too. The description is clinical, a demon of confusion, unable to maintain corporeal form. But there's a specific edition you need to know about. The 1608 German edition of the Lemegeton lists Argosax with an unusual instruction. To summon him, the magician had to draw a circle in human ash, not animal blood. This detail appears only in that edition. It suggests a scribe experimented with different rituals. The Catholic Church noticed. In 1620, they condemned the Key of Solomon. They weren't condemning a myth. They were condemning a manual, a book that told you exactly how to summon these things. Argosax wasn't a story. It was a name you could call. They didn't invent Argosax. They listed him. In a book the church wanted burned, a chaos demon that couldn't hold a form. But Devil May Cry has a demon that is a form, a living fortress. And that one's based on real experiments. Case 7, Nightmare, 1583, Bavaria. The trial of a woman named Anna Megerli. Nightmare is a giant flesh-colored blob in Devil May Cry. But the source of that design, and the name, comes from actual folklore. The nightmare was a creature that sat on your chest while you slept. It wasn't a metaphor. People genuinely believed a demon was physically pressing down on them. The word nightmare comes from the Old English mare, a demonic creature that suffocated sleepers. In Devil May Cry, nightmare is a living weapon. In real folklore, it was a living attack. You'd wake up unable to move. You'd see a shape in the corner of your vision. You'd feel the weight. The earliest medical description of what we now call sleep paralysis comes from a 1583 Bavarian witch trial. Anna Megerli described exactly this: a crushing weight, a figure in the room, the inability to scream. Her interrogators interpreted this as demonic assault. They wrote it down as evidence of a nightmare demon. Her confession, which was almost certainly coerced, described the creature in detail: a shapeless thing of flesh, neither man nor beast. Modern science confirms the phenomenon. In 1999, psychologist Alan Shane surveyed over 12,000 people. He found that nearly 30% experience sleep paralysis at least once. The hallucinations are strikingly consistent across cultures: a weight on the chest, a presence in the room, a feeling of choking. Anna Megerli's confession matches Shane's findings with eerie precision. She described a condition that has a biological cause. But in 1583, nobody knew that. They had a different explanation. They wrote it down as fact. Nightmare isn't a design. It's a diagnosis of a state you can experience tonight. A demon that suffocates you in your sleep. But Devil May Cry also has a demon from a frozen lake. And that one comes from a real cold case. Case 6. Bael, 1405. An English monk named John of London writes about a demon called Bael. Bael in Devil May Cry is a giant frog demon, but Bael is a corruption of Baal, one of the oldest gods in human history. Baal was the storm god of the ancient Near East. The Philistines worshipped him. The Phoenicians built temples for him. In the Bible, he's the direct competitor of Yahweh. The name appears over 90 times. By the Middle Ages, Baal had been demoted from god to demon. He became the first king of hell in some demonologies. The frog association comes from the biblical story of the plagues of Egypt, frogs raining down as divine punishment. Some medieval interpreters linked that plague to Baal. The transition from Baal to Baal is documented across multiple centuries. In the 1405 manuscript, Liber de Spirituum, the name is written as Baal. In the 1597 publication of the Pseudomonarchia Daemonum, it's spelled Baal. But the oldest source is the Ugaritic texts. Discovered in the 1920s at Ras Shamra, Syria, these tablets date to 1400 BC. They contain the Baal cycle, an epic poem where Baal defeats the sea god Yam and the death god Mot. This is the earliest written evidence of Baal as a major deity. When Jewish scribes translated Canaanite texts into Hebrew, they reinterpreted Baal as a false god, a demon. The frog association comes from a 1486 work called Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. That book claimed demons often appeared as frogs. Baal was a god. Frogs were a plague. Connect the dots, and you get Baal, a frog demon king. The Malleus Maleficarum was used as a legal manual for witch trials. Real people died because of it. Baal wasn't just a name in a book. Baal was a name in a death warrant. A storm god becomes a frog demon becomes a death warrant. Paperwork made Baal real. From a storm god to a frog demon. But Devil May Cry has a demon made of fire, and that one's based on a real medieval monster. Case 5. Berial, 1584. A book called De Prestigiis Daemonum, on the tricks of demons. Berial is a fire demon in Devil May Cry. Huge, blazing, covered in molten rock. The name comes from Belial, one of the most famous demons in Western occult tradition. Belial means worthless in Hebrew. The Bible calls him a son of Belial, a wicked person. But by the Middle Ages, Belial had become a demon prince. He was the demon of fire, destruction, and pride. In some texts, Belial is the demon who possesses the Catholic Church's Antichrist. In others, he's the demon who destroys cities. The most detailed description of Belial comes from Johann Weyer's De Prestigiis Daemonum. Weyer published it in 1563, not 1584, as many sources claim. Weyer was a Renaissance physician who studied under the famous occultist Cornelius Agrippa. His demon catalog was banned by the Catholic Church in 1568. Despite the ban, it became the primary source for later grimoires. Weyer was one of the first to argue that many accused witches were mentally ill, not possessed. That made him dangerous to the Church. Weyer cited earlier sources. Belial appears in the Clavicula Salomonis, the Lemegeton, and the Liber Officiorum Spirituum. In the 1610 edition of the Lemegeton, Belial's summoning instructions are specific: a circle cast in the blood of a pure animal, the name written in the four corners. The summoner must hold a consecrated blade. These weren't stories, these were procedures. Berial isn't a fictional demon. He's an entry in a catalog of creatures people really tried to summon. Fire, frogs, formlessness. But Devil May Cry has a demon that's four-faced. And that one's not just old, it's ancient. Case 4, Geryon, 750 BC. The Greek poet Hesiod writes about a creature called Geryon. Geryon in Devil May Cry is a horse-like demon that controls time. But in Greek mythology, Geryon was a giant with 3 bodies. He lived on an island called Erythea. He had a herd of red cattle. Heracles killed him as his 10th labor. That's the story. But here's the strange part. Geryon's name in the original Greek means the one who carries the earth. Hesiod's Theogony describes Geryon in detail. 3-headed Geryon, whom Heracles killed in sea-girt Erythea. The 3 bodies were sometimes 3 heads, sometimes 3 torsos. The number 3 was consistent. In 1920, a papyrus fragment was discovered in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt. It's now catalogued as Poxy 1083 at the Sackler Library in Oxford. It dated to the 2nd century AD. It described Geryon as one of the oldest demons, older than the gods. The fragment was part of a commentary on Plato. The commentator, likely a Neoplatonist, claimed that Geryon represented time. 3 bodies, 3 stages, past, present, future. The demon who carries the earth was really the demon who carries time itself. The commentator argued that Heracles defeating Geryon represented the triumph of reason over the tyranny of time. Devil May Cry made Geryon a time-controlling horse, but the original source says the same thing. Geryon is a demon of time. The Greek text is over 2,000 years old. A time demon from a myth older than most religions. Devil May Cry didn't change that part. Time demons, fire demons. But the middle of this file is where things get truly strange. The next case is a demon that wasn't a demon. It was an idol, and people worshipped it for 1,000 years. Case 3, Agnus, 3100 BC, Mesopotamia, the city of Nippur. Agnus in Devil May Cry is a scientist who turns into a demon, not a monster, a man who becomes something else. The name Agnus is Latin for lamb, but that's a mistranslation. The real source is older. The Sumerian god called Agnus, or more accurately, Agnushtu, was a guardian deity of thresholds. He was depicted as a man with a goat's head and a snake's body. This isn't Christian iconography. This is pre-biblical. This is Mesopotamian. The Sumerian god Agnushtu appears in tablets excavated at Nippur in the 1880s. The Pennsylvania expedition, led by Hermann Hilprecht between 1888 and 1900, found over 30,000 tablets. Tablet number 2737 contains the complete hymn to Agnushtu. It describes him as the one who holds the threshold between the living and the dead. The Sumerian term Agnushtu translates literally to door of the boundary. Agnushtu wasn't a demon. He was a protector. But when Babylonian culture absorbed Sumerian religion, Agnushtu was demoted. The Babylonians made him a servant of the death goddess Ereshkigal. The association with thresholds became an association with boundaries, the boundary between life and death. By the time Jewish texts described him, Agnus had become Agnus, a demon who opens doors, a demon who lets things through, a demon who turns people into something else. A Sumerian protector, became a Babylonian servant, became a Jewish demon. 3 translations turned a god into a monster, a god becoming a demon. But the next case is a demon that was a person, and that person was a real historical figure. We're halfway through this file. The next case is the one I genuinely could not stop thinking about. Case 2. Urizen, 1650. London. A man named Elias Ashmole writes in his diary, Urizen in Devil May Cry 5 is a demon emperor. He's the main antagonist. His name comes from William Blake's mythology. Blake invented Urizen as a fallen god, a being of reason who became a tyrant. But Blake didn't invent the name, he found it. Urizen is a variant of Urizen, a demon mentioned in the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah. In Jewish mysticism, Urizen is the demon of divine judgment. He sits on a throne of ice. He holds a sword of fire. The Zohar was written in the 13th century. It describes Urizen as the angel who became a demon by judging too harshly. He was once a servant of God. He was given the power to judge mortals. He judged them all guilty, and he was cast out. In 1650, Elias Ashmole, founder of the Ashmolean Museum, wrote about Urizen in his personal diary. The demon of judgment sits in the frozen north. His throne is made of the sins he has accumulated. Ashmole was an alchemist, astrologer, and one of the most meticulous record-keepers of his era. William Blake read Ashmole's diary. In 1794, Blake published Europe a Prophecy, an illuminated book that introduced Urizen. Blake's own annotated copy of the Zohar survives in the British Library. You can see his marginalia comparing Urizen directly to the English crown. Urizen wasn't just a demon, he was a political statement, a critique of tyranny. Urizen is the only demon on this list created by an English poet, but that poet's source was a real Kabbalistic text, a demon of judgment, invented by a poet based on a real mystical text. One case remains. It's the one I mentioned at the start. Case 1, Behemoth, 1665, the Vatican. A priest named Francesco Barberini commissions a book called Thesaurus Exorcismorum. Behemoth in Devil May Cry is a giant monster made of blades, a creature of pure destruction. But the real Behemoth is even stranger. The Book of Job describes Behemoth as the chief of God's ways, a creature so powerful that only its creator can defeat it. It was a land monster, the counterpart to the Leviathan. But here's where the story gets real. In 1665, the Vatican published Thesaurus Exorcismorum, a collection of exorcism rituals. It included an entire section on Behemoth, not as a myth, as a demon to be expelled. Thesaurus Exorcismorum was compiled from the records of Vatican exorcists. It spans 3 volumes. The Behemoth section is detailed. The demon Behemoth manifests as a weight upon the chest. It manifests as a sudden cold. It manifests as a voice that cannot be localized. But the most disturbing detail is this. The book includes a summoning warning. It warns priests not to read the Behemoth prayers aloud unless they are prepared to face the demon. For Behemoth is not merely cast out. Behemoth comes when called. In 2009, the Vatican published an updated edition of Exorcisms and Related Supplications. It includes a revised section on Behemoth. The 2009 text explicitly warns that the prayer is reserved for the most serious cases. It must not be recited without the bishop's permission, but the 1665 original had no such restriction. Any ordained priest could attempt it. The Vatican didn't publish this as mythology. They published it as a manual. Real priests used it. Real exorcisms were performed. Real people believed Behemoth would show up if you read the wrong words. Behemoth wasn't a monster in a story. Behemoth was a monster in a manual, and the Vatican told priests not to accidentally summon it. The final piece of evidence is the hardest to explain. The Vatican still holds classified files on exorcisms performed in the 1960s. Some of them describe a phenomenon they called Behemoth manifestation. The records are sealed until 2070. Here's what connects all 9 cases. Every demon in Devil May Cry was once a real belief, not just a story, a record, a written document that someone took seriously. Griffon wasn't a game monster. It was a dinosaur fossil misinterpreted by ancient miners. Argosax wasn't a chaos demon. It was a grimoire entry in a banned manual. Nightmare wasn't a design choice. It was a medical condition they blamed on demons. These aren't fantasies. These are testimonies. Real people, real books, real institutions, all of them treating these creatures as real. And that's the pattern. The older the demon, the more paperwork it has. The demon you remember most from the game is the one with the most documentation in the real world. Case file number 22. Closed. Drop a comment if you actually knew Behemoth was in a Vatican manual before today. I'll wait. Next time, we're opening a file on the demons you didn't even know were in the game, the ones hidden in the background art. This is Professor Detective. Stay curious. The truth is always hiding in plain sight.